Yes, I mean, obviously it's going to be difficult for most learners to, that in the moment, they're not necessarily going to remember, okay, this is the strategy, this is, of course, but you can say that about anything which is taught
Yeah.
explicitly. So, the hope is that it gives them a kind of peg to hang it on and to understand it, and to you can give them practice with it, etc. in the class. And then hopefully over time, they will, if they choose to, they will be able to use them better to have more successful conversations. That's the idea.
That's really interesting, because I think you just answered the question I was about to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just to make sure, just to clarify
Yeah,
it,
sure.
because this always comes up. I feel like when we talk about teaching speaking or teaching strategies for a conversation or communication, is that as teachers, I think a lot of us say, or think, what does it look like to teach speaking? If students are speaking, does that mean that we're teaching speaking? And I feel like Paul Nation always comes up when we have these discussions too, and his 4 strands. And where do you fall with that in terms of conversation strategies? Because as you just said, if we can teach it once and students can conceptually understand, okay, I get it. But is teaching conversation strategies more about the opportunity of fluency development, and not necessarily as teachers saying, I have to teach something today, but giving our students an opportunity to practice and put in use what they've already been exposed to or already been given instruction on, let's say explicitly, but these strategies develop, as you said, over time. So is then the focus on that strand of nation, the fluency development of, they already are aware of it, but they need to develop the skill of it?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think probably, like all things with, in terms of acquisition, obviously things will develop over time. But I think for an awful lot of learners, they haven't got lots of time, and they're coming to classes. And I pitch this in the book as a kind of something that people could, focus on in the classroom. Obviously, there's many other ways that people could acquire spoken skills, conversation skills, but it's not always available to them. I think most learners are coming to the classroom to at least have their development speeded up in some way, hopefully. That may or may not happen, but that's what they're sort of hoping for. So I think that if these conversation strategies give uh, teachers one way to organize uh, lessons in this area, and give them a means to do that, and maybe give learners also a kind of help them to organize it and to understand it a bit more clearly. I think if students are just given opportunities to talk to each other in community activities, yeah, I think they will develop in some ways. But as you said, it might take a long time, and I think they're probably coming to classes in order for us to help them to speed up that development. So
Right.
I see this as one way that could help that. I'm pretty clear in the book that I'm not saying this is the way. It's not the only way. There are many, there may be lots of other ways, but I just put it forward as a way. And I think that's a clear distinction that I tried to make.
Perfect.
And yeah, and I think it was a great question, Andrew. And I think sorry, Chris, for
That's okay.
being a little late to this party. But
Okay, no
yeah,
problem.
Andrew, I thought your question was great, and I think what I like, Chris, you wrote a little bit about not only the grammatical aspect of it, but also the sociocultural. And I think
Hmm.
really the classroom itself is kind of a space where we're preparing learners for their target communities, right? And
Yep.
part of our role is to kind of make those affordances for them to have opportunities to kind of prepare for that, right? And
Yep.
I certainly work in an EAP setting, so English for Academic Purposes setting, and it's
Hmm.
amazing how many times I've taught presentation skills. But when I speak to my students after they graduate their programs, um, they often come to me and say, you know, Mike, I can give a presentation like a TED talk, like a TED talker, right? Like I feel super confident, but I'm still struggling with making friends, and I'm really struggling with these kind of everyday, real social, the interaction that Leo talked about earlier. I'm struggling with that
Yeah.
day-to-day interaction, and it's a challenge, though, isn't it, for teachers to find space in the syllabus to cover these things? I'm just wondering, it kind of dovetails from Andrew's question. How might teachers find space in the syllabus? Do you see this as like a critical incident type thing where like, oh, here's a problem, how might we solve this?
Mhm.
Or are there any specific techniques that you feel might be easily applied without taking up too much space? Because there is that battle, right?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, it's a bigger question, perhaps, but yeah, I think you mentioned about EAP situations. I think what happens on EAP courses very often is that a lot of time, quite understandably, is given to academic uh, discourse, such as giving presentations, reading, writing. Okay, and there's good reason for that. We all know that. And then there is less time for helping people to interact and to have better conversations, more successful conversations, if you like. But actually, I think that is critical, because if they're particularly in an English-speaking environment such as the one that I work in, that's the way they're able to get instant feedback on how they're doing. They can write an essay or something, and they'll hand it in, and it'll take a while to get any feedback. But their day-to-day interactions are where they get feedback on how they're doing and whether they're successful or not. And the learners from the study that I did in the book about who were in the UK, they weren't studying on an EAP program. They were just studying on a general English program, but they were in the UK, and what we found was in their diaries that they did report going out of the class and using some of the strategies, and they did report that it helped them in some way. And they often reported about the kind of conversations that they were having were actually often on very, very simple, general, everyday topics. That's the kind of conversations that they wanted to have. So it could be all kinds of things, like I went to the gym and I spoke to such and such about X or Y, that kind of thing. Or I spoke to a taxi driver and I showed I was listening, and the conversation carried on a bit more. Okay, it's very, very simple. They were, lower intermediate level, so that might have influenced it. But yeah, I think certainly it can help students to have a feeling of, I think you mentioned the word agency, to feel more that they are in control of what they want to say, and perhaps to help them to have more successful conversations. Yeah.